Welcome to lesson 3 of week 1. We're going to talk about what systematic approach is and why it is important. Of course, it's kind of a repetition of the first lesson. All of the reasons that I talked about why testing is important apply here as well. It's predictability, consistency, learning and identifying your mistakes before you apply it to final form, figuring out what results might be different and maybe potential directions of where you'd like to go in your experimentation and your artistic flow. It's also an interesting balance between control and letting go. I do believe that surrendering to the circumstances and to whatever life brings us is a very important skill. It's one of the most important factors and most important things you could possibly do in your life to truly enjoy it. One thing is to swim in a river, into the flow, let go, and begin to bump into the rocks, break the ship that you are navigating. And the other thing is to be able to navigate the ship through the rocks, even though you are following the current of the river. When you are in control, you can slightly change the direction of your experiments so that they fit what you'd like to express. And I think in general, the ability to express of what you're imagining is such a cool thing to me that who can say no to that? Another thing is building a knowledge base. Again, it is very useful if you want to continue your exploration and if you want to come back to what you've discovered again and again and again. And if you want to have a lot more tools in your toolkit that you can use later. It also does simplify the decision making so you can quickly decide what you want to do next. What is the systematic approach, though, is a good question. I imagine coming up with a specific idea and then deciding, creating an experiment of how I can get to this idea and how I can prove whether this idea is workable and possible or not. It might sound complicated, but it really isn't. I will explain how to create the system out of what you're trying out in various ways throughout the course. It could be just adding tiny increments of material into your tests. It could be adding different materials into your test in different quantities. There's a lot of ways of how you create a system, but the most important thing, though, is how you can navigate the system later. And one of the very important parts for the system is how do you keep your records? It is important because our memories are not perfect and everything that we're making, we're going to forget. I forget in 2 hours, but you might forget next day or next year. You do not know what's going to happen to your textiles. You do not know what's going to happen to everything that you're creating. Maybe there's going to be an earthquake. Hopefully not. Maybe you're going to move and lose them. Hopefully not. But the most likely thing that might happen is that if you do not record your textiles, you're just going to forget what you were testing. Even before I load my kiln, if I load more than 10 textiles, I had no idea what I tested because I do not know how the final result is going to look like before I test it at least once. So if I do not write it down, I'm not going to know. Which things do I normally write down? First of all, I'm using the underlay spade pencil. This is one of the examples of the pencils I like to use. It's not erased during firing, which is nice. I like to write down my name. Name is important if you are in a community studio and you need to recognize your things. What I do write down is the type of clay. Sometimes I record that. The date of the experiment, because very often this will help me connect the dots of what I did and when. Even if I did it in 2 years ago or a year ago, at least approximately I know what my line of thinking was at that time. I also create some kind of identification number for my tests. For example, I write the first letter for lava glaze, like L, and then I say, okay, that's my first recipe that I'm trying, the second recipe, the third recipe. So I'm going to have L1, L2, L3, and then I'm going to add some variations. Just the most important thing is that I understand what I'm writing and I understand my type of record keeping. For example, now I'm still using some of the tests that at some point I called Lava 8 or Slit 12. And I identify those tests and those recipes just based on this identification number that I created very, very long time ago. The same thing goes with rocks. You might not know what the rock is, but on the container where you store your rock, you might write down rock number 11. Who knows what that is? It might be quartzite, it might be something else. We don't care, we just need to write it down. If the underglaze pencil is erased after the firing, it's a really nice habit to write down on the back as soon as you remember what this is, the identification number and everything else you want to write down immediately after firing, just because even an hour later you're gonna lose them, you're gonna forget them, and it's gonna be hard to identify them again. The most important thing is digital record keeping. You could do it on paper too, but I do think that digitally is just so nice and easy. Everything can get lost. Everything physical can get lost. Digital, though, so far proved to be more stable. It could be an external hard drive, or it could be the cloud, wherever you like to do your things. It could be both and all the above. I got this habit of creating presentations, again, from the ceramics material course that I took during the last 2 years, and I really enjoyed. We created presentations in any presentation app you like. I use Canva just because of the design choices. It's free, it's easy to use, it's easy to cut my images in the way I like. So it's really pretty and not as cumbersome as Microsoft PowerPoint or anything else. There's also a really cool app that's called segerlab.ru, Russian website that Russian ceramicist created, one of my friends. They came up with a really wonderful way to store the glaze recipes. So if you're really looking for a convenient way to store recipes, you could use segerlab.ru. It is a cool tool. I mostly use Canva. I create my presentations and I write down all the details that I can, that I have courage to, that I have time to, because it is a very tedious task. I do not like doing it, but I know that I'm gonna like it next time I want to use the same recipe. I'm losing my recipes all the time. I look at my notebook. I think, is that the recipe that I've used? Maybe I changed something. I do not know. So all of this I can write down. I can write down the lab number, the date when I did my lab. I definitely need to take a picture of the result so that I can identify this test style later if I find it in physical form. I can kind of connect it to my huge library, digital library of the recipes and all of my test styles. I also include the recipe or any of the descriptions of the materials used. It might be rocks from that mountain or from that region. It might be the recipe that I found here and here. Any modifications that you've included, maybe the water content, maybe some specific firing temperature or specific shelf in the kiln or firing schedule. There's so many variables, and you kind of want to make sure that you know what they were before you replicate your recipe, you replicate your test style, so that you can get consistent results. I also like to write down anything else that comes up when I look at my test style. It might be any other notes, any thoughts that I have. Maybe I really like this test style. Or maybe I came up with an idea of how I can test it again, but in a different variation. Or what else I can change about the recipe or about this specific technique. It is a very fun thing to do, and I invite you to record your test styles digitally because it's going to help you a lot in the future. It takes some time. It does give you immediate rewards afterwards.